So the first thing we're going to go over when it comes to the shift is we want to really look at the shift from a behind view first, because outside of force plates and other testing, really truly we're going to have our eyes first. So let's look at some different concepts there, especially from the behind view, which is going to reveal the most pieces for you. So we're going to see same kid, this is about a month apart. And so when we think about the shift, remember, if the concept of the shift is to create that pressure and weight transfer from all the weight we managed on the drop into that single loaded leg, we have to understand that then direction is involved here. So when we're looking at an athlete from behind and we think about, how they stand, we want to see, okay, where's the back hip referencing? Where is it pointing? So when we look at the back hip here, we can already see the foot's pointed that way. The hip is still rotated inward slightly, but that can possibly present itself as a problem into being able to shift our weight better into that front foot. So that's the first thing we would look at. And so as we watch her go through her space here, we see that stance is a problem for her. You can see the hip rotate back and around towards us, which isn't a good thing. And here's the thing, as those things are happening, there is 1% to 2% of athletes that are still going to be able to shift well, regardless of this happening, because they have more awareness of where their body is in space. And they know the task is, I want to drive from this front foot as well as possible. So they're going to put themselves back into position. For the majority of athletes, that's not going to happen. So we see that she doesn't give herself an advantage, number one, by understanding that the shift is directional. So my back hip, and responsible through that hip cycle, is what? Supposed to change the angle of my pelvis and set it up ultimately to push and shift energy into that front foot. That's how the hip cycle also compares with these transfers of energy. So if I don't know and your pitcher doesn't know, number one, that the goal of her back hip is to set that weight transfer up, then that's going to be a problem as well, because a lot of times everything they're thinking is about forward to the catcher. My first directions aren't forward, they are into something, into the ground, then into my lead leg, my front foot. So just clarifying that for an athlete and giving them that example will help as well to allow them to see, like, okay, let me give them the example, explain to them what their shift is, give them some examples, and then see what they do in a pitch. So now, from an adjustment standpoint, this is why this athlete, once we get foot to foot, when she's pushing, all that weight that stayed on the left, her push is actually going to take her more to the left and offline. That's why you see the body moving in this space right here, because we didn't get all of our body weight to shift into that space. So we want to be sure that those things are happening for her, and we want to be sure that the athlete understands the concept of the shift, and then us as the coach, we look at it from behind and we can make specific adjustments. So how do we make adjustments from that spacing and manner? Well, number one, I want to see what they do by themselves, and then I'm going to allow them to be them, and then I'm going to give them tips. Okay, so let's talk about this back heel. Let's do this. I want you to understand that once you get set, we have that rule, our ACES, so our front hip bone, we want to be in line with that. So we can see from that point, she's a little wide, so that can be an issue. We see the ACES, now she's inside and more in line in that spacing. So all I told her was, from that space, I want you to understand that you're going to push, and I set that up for her. Your back hip takes you into your front foot, not towards the catcher. And so I gave her a spacing that would assist her, and I gave her this cue. I want you to think about this big toe pushing towards this big toe. Now, is that cue going to be successful for everybody? No, you can play with different cues, You can say things like, I want that foot to push towards this back heel. All those things are important. The reason I used the big toe as a reference for her was because she's going to get more weight on the outside of her foot here, so the big toe is lifted. And even though we're going to push from our red zone, more of the outer part of our foot, I wanted to use the big toe as our reference point so that she could feel when she got off of it in her cleat or her shoe. If the big toe pulled up inside her shoe, she was likely going to rotate that hip. And so you're not even setting yourself up for that shift. So now, when we get that same moment, when we drop down and then go into our shift, there's the shift happening. You see the front foot come down. Front foot comes down. Now we see much more even hips, much less of this rotation happening. And yeah, the knees can look a little wonky here, but that's because she's emphasizing pushing off that big toe, doesn't understand that she could just rotate her heel out as well. And I did that on purpose. I'm not going to give her too much. We're going to start with direction first. Are you in charge of your direction? Because that's going to create a shift. And then you get into the deeper details of, okay, now let's talk about being sure that in order for that big toe to push to get the big toe, you're going to angle or rotate inside the hip socket to move in that direction. So now as she moves through, we're going to go to that same foot-to-foot space. When we get right about to that same moment, we see some significant differences already. We get to the top of her head. Look how in line that is. That is a shift. I've gotten all that weight to get on top of that leg, so now I'm going to possess a better opportunity to drive through it and drive in the direction I want, which is now towards the catcher. So just changing those things, we're going to go to this spot right here. Same moment. Let's get the glove there. So same moment in time. Just that little adjustment of that weight not moving to the left. Here's where we see a lot of the bigger differences. Tailing off to the left on the right. There is much less fall off at the delivery. And we can start to begin the process of teaching them moving away from the shoulder. But when we don't have this shift, it's not going to be as accessible to us in that manner. Much less of all that whipping motion of the hips going out to this side and a much more distinctive finish. And that's the progression of something. That's how you can get to landing and delivery and start to make that consistent later on, because energy is always moving in the same manner. So from the behind view, those are things we want to be able to help an athlete set up with. I helped her with the stance. I didn't give her help with direction. I just said, hey, your back hip drives and sets you up in the front hip. So we see there's that external rotation coming again. Look how that changes everything for her. And now she's going to go off to the left. That's why direction is so important. And then once we give them direction and ability, it is not just change the stance. It is give them a better stance. We work through that rectangle we talked about, and then give them direction. And if they can't make that direction happen, I'd rather them fail first, and then I can be like, hey, you want some help? Why would I point my foot more out and then have the expectation that just because I changed my stance, I'm still not going to go to the left? Big toe pressure there. And then my next adjustment will be, once I get buy-in there, hey, why don't we work on pivoting through the hip socket and see what that does? and we make those adjustments. But that's how I don't have force plates, I don't have those things, I can visually see from a behind view that process. Here's going to be another example of more of someone who starts with the bent knee, so hip archetype 3. The other one was an example of hip archetype 2. And we see these same moments. So notice the adjustment here, more in line, and it's going to be different. You play within that rectangle for everybody, but the biggest thing is you give direction. This was her initial. Look at the heel, trying to find her center of mass instead of her moving her center of mass towards that front foot. This was before she knew anything about the shift. No description, no understanding. Now she understands what she's trying to accomplish after she drops. Drop, shift, and we'll get to that same moment in time. You can see that the upper body's already moving. She has better hip stability, but she sacrificed that hip stability because she had to move her heel in so that it would anchor her. So that means she's going to be on her heel longer because her heel is her anchor. And that's how she created this stability. Once she rises up to her foot, oh boy. Rises up to our foot, in line right here. Much, much different in this space. Same moment in time. I'm getting a drive. I'm getting control of the foot. All those things happen just by shifting better and coaching it just from that behind view in terms of direction and giving them an understanding of what the process is from that first transfer to that second transfer. Now, this isn't even talking about the performance aspect of moving more and more weight into that front foot. Number one, I have to understand in my shift direction first. Direction has to be important. And then you can get into the performance aspect of, okay, if they were on a force plate, how would I enhance those numbers to increase how well or how aggressive they are when they drive?